So, the year is closing out. We're all thinking, hoping, or panicking about what 2023 will bring us all. The next big game I'll be starting in 2023 is a PS5 and Xbox Series X console port of a 2-year-old Nintendo Switch game. And it's got me thinking about what 2023 means for the Nintendo Switch itself. Because I also play this very same game on PC, where it runs at 4K 60fps, as also it will on Xbox and PS5, of course. And it's a wonderfully, beautifully, excellently smooth and crisp experience compared to the non-native 1080p 30fps the Switch manages for this game. But even so, I'm closing in on 1700 hours of gameplay on this one game alone on the Nintendo Switch, so hardware isn't everything, is it? It is of course no great secret that the Nintendo Switch is underpowered, significantly so. Certainly by today's standards, it is lagging behind massively, and it is more than just a philosophical argument between gamers at this point. It's more than a discussion about how acceptable it is that the flagship hyper-popular franchise games like Pokemon, or indeed Monster Hunter here, can't even run at 1080p native and at best targets 30fps. This hardware is literally holding games back. They simply cannot be as good, as fun, as complex, as pleasingly presented as they should be, as they could be, as they deserve to be. This hardware is crippling game devs. And while literally every goddamn year since it launched there's been rumors about a so-called Nintendo Switch Pro, which of course are mostly just blind wishing being presented as rumors for the sake of clickbaity headlines, there is genuine reason to believe that 2023 will indeed, at last, be the year some of these headlines get to be true, that we will see a successor to the Switch come to market and actually be on shelves and be asking for your money. So let's start. Nintendo Switch, a console in the deepest need of a successor, or at the very least a significant hardware revision in line with what Sony managed to achieve with the PS4 Pro and Microsoft with the Xbox One X. And the easiest marker to point at when asked, well, why 2023? Well, it's simply the timing. So let's look at Nintendo's own history of console releases for a clue. Kicking off with the NES, or NES, depending on what side of the fence you're on that pronunciation, in 1985, or arguably 1983 because the Famicom existed. 7 years after that came the Super Nintendo in 1990. It took 6 years before the Nintendo 64 saw shelves in 1996. It lived for 6 years before the GameCube came along in 2001. 5 years later, Nintendo launches the Wii. That was in 2006. Then, 6 years after that, the Wii U in 2012. Like the GameCube before it, the Wii U kind of failed to meet Nintendo's hopes. So the gap again was just 5 years before the Nintendo Switch launched in 2017. This year was the Switch's 5th anniversary. The Switch has been doing extremely well still in the market, but as of March the 3rd, 2023, it will hit its 6th year on shelves. And if you've been paying the slightest bit of attention as I listed those out, since the Super Nintendo in 1990, it's been a pretty reliable 6-year cycle. The only 2 exceptions to that being a shortened 5-year cycle for the GameCube and Wii U respectively, both considered commercial failures. So it is a pretty easy line to draw based on that very clear pattern that we will see at least an upgraded Switch successor, if not a complete replacement, in 2023. That's the pattern every 6 years. There's also the matter of the hardware internals itself, specifically the NVIDIA chip at the heart of the Nintendo Switch. Since as early as March 2021, there were rumors circulating that NVIDIA would be discontinuing production of the Tegra X1 chip at the heart of every current model Nintendo Switch. That of course never happened, and still hasn't happened. And the rumors at the time were attributed only to persons familiar with the matter, which is hacker journalist speak for, I made it up, it's a guess. There was indeed a new Switch launched later that same year though, the OLED model, with a larger, better screen, but like the Switch Lite before it, absolutely identical internal hardware specs. So what about that NVIDIA chip? When will it go end of life? Nothing lives forever in this tech space. When will it be replaced by a new, faster, more powerful, more efficient model? The short answer is it already has. It's just Nintendo aren't using them. In fact, there were better models out before the Switch launched. There are many generations of NVIDIA Tegra chips stretching back to 2006, and they're used for all kinds of things, from like basic bitch mobile phones to AI driverless car brains. The specific one in the Switch is called the Tegra X1. It first saw a commercial product in 2015 with the original NVIDIA Shield TV. And if you're doing the math, yes, that means the X1 was already on shelves in commercial products 2 years before the Nintendo Switch itself released. And yes, it is a safe assumption to make that there were already 2 other later generation models of the Tegra X line available by then, codenamed Parker and Xavier. And yes, they are named after the Marvel Comics characters, both variations of the Tegra X2 chip. So the Nintendo Switch launched with out-of-date hardware. And it's not really through incompetence that happened, it's just because Nintendo were building to a price and design ideal. It's easy enough to assume the X2 line wasn't reached for because it was less ideal from a power consumption point of view, or a manufacturing point of view at scale, or it would have pushed the price higher than Nintendo wanted to switch at. There could have been any number of reasons they didn't bother reaching further than the X1, which was already out of date at the time. In fact, current model Switch actually run on a slight variation called the Tegra X1 Plus, which is functionally identical, except it closes a hardware flaw that allowed the first generation of Nintendo Switches to be easily hacked and jailbroken in a way that couldn't be closed off by software patches. And as you all know, Nintendo really hate when you do things with your own hardware. So they updated the chip to close that little loophole, but its performance and specs are otherwise identical. The current official statement is, at least as far as officially from Nintendo's official CEO himself, is there will be no new Nintendo Switch hardware before the end of the company's fiscal year. You can put about as much stock in that as you like because Nintendo are well known for lying or using word trickery to get around things. Remember when the DS was going to be a third pillar and the Game Boy line was still going to exist on an ongoing basis? Yeah, that never happened. How even just before the Nintendo OLED and even the Switch Lite launched, Nintendo was saying similar things about no new models coming, and whether or not you consider these new models or not because internally they're identical is a different thing, but you know, Nintendo love to be a bit weaselly with their words and sometimes just flat out lie to people for marketing reasons. But that's neither here nor there, because that fiscal year he's talking about, the no new Nintendo Switch hardware before the end of the company's fiscal year, well, that ends March 2023, and hey, didn't we just talk about how the Nintendo Switch launched in March? Yes, it did. So, no new Nintendo Switch hardware before March next year, and the Nintendo Switch hits its 6th birthday in March, and the time between generational gaps is, what did we say again? It was 6 years, wasn't it? That's an awful lot of coincidences lining up right there, isn't it? They're not coincidences at all. But does that mean a new Nintendo Switch Pro in March of 2023, right on the 6-year mark? That's unlikely. Really unlikely, I think, as the marketing push would have started by now, or at the very least would have some more credible rumors rumbling about by now. Unless they suddenly got very good at keeping secrets, or they wanted to use the Christmas, buying push to scramble out as many of the existing inventories of Switch, Switch Lite, and Switch OLED models from their warehouses and store shelves as they could. And that'd be a bit hard to do if you tell people there's a much more powerful version coming along in under 6 months' time, wouldn't it? So, pretty understandable. There's no marketing push for anything else just yet, and they're still in the denial mode. But from announcement of a new console to launching a new console inside of 5 months, I feel like it's unlikely but not impossible. I think it's more likely we'll see the next generation Switch, whatever it's called, come out closer to the end of the year, somewhere between September and December. But let's go back to the hardware side of things, because there's information on that side too. There's a new Tegra chipset being rumbled about called the T239. We don't know even as much as the codename for it. I've seen a couple of suggestions what the codename should or could be, but I haven't seen any confirmation of any of that. But it is said to be a customized Tegra T234, which we do know the codename for. It's codenamed Orin. And there's a few variations of it already. And the 234 has for a while now been mentioned in the same breath quite frequently in speculation pieces about an upgraded Nintendo Switch. So the newer information that there's a customized version of the 234 called the 239, which is apparently very specifically intended for a next generation Nintendo Switch, well, things start lining up a bit. And if true, this all means that the Switch Pro, which almost certainly won't be how it's marketed by Nintendo, but it is a shorthand everybody else is using right now, so I'll just stick with it. But the Switch Pro would run on NVIDIA's Ampere GPU architecture, because that's what that Tegra 239 or 234 uses. Now, the Ampere architecture will be most familiar to gamers, PC gamers specifically, as the brain inside the very well-received GeForce RTX 3000 series of PC GPUs from NVIDIA. My own gaming PC currently runs an RTX 3080 Ti, cooking along on one of Ampere's most powerful implementations. But Ampere runs all the way down to the RTX 3050, of course, and even the mobile-specific variant of the RTX 2050. Reportedly, the alleged Tegra 239 will contain 2048 CUDA cores, which, believe it or not, I knew this off the top of my head for some reason, is the exact same CUDA core count as an RTX 3050 GPU. And that is, as you might imagine, a very significant jump up from the equivalent 256 shader cores in the Tegra X1, which uses Maxwell-based GPU architecture. And to put that into perspective of PC GPUs, that was what the GTX 900 series of NVIDIA GPUs used, several generations back. Now, apparently, the Tegra 239 should deliver 4 teraflops of performance, which, compared to what the Switch does right now, is, well, it's a big difference, because every Nintendo Switch on the market right now can manage 0.4 teraflops of output. 0.4 versus 4. Now, I'm not a math genius by any stretch of the imagination, and my brain just isn't wired up in a way that makes math easy for me to think about, but that's 10 times the increase, right? In terafloppage? Now, don't get too hung up on that, though. The idiotic and wildly misleading discourse focused around teraflops just before the PS5 and Xbox Series X launched should have taught you all just how meaningless that number can be on paper. What's of most interest to me, however, over and above the base level performance increase, which the Switch desperately needs, is if the Ampere-based GPU architecture inside this Tegra chip will bring with it the tensor cores of the larger overall Ampere architecture. The tensor cores that the PC GPUs have, because those little buggers allow it to do nifty stuff like NVIDIA's very clever and remarkably effective machine learning image upscaling trickery, DLSS, Deep Learning Super Sampling, which, if you've not seen it in action with your own eyes yet, is pretty damn impressive at doing stuff like allowing games to run at 4K 60 FPS that ordinarily you just don't have the raw power to do so. If you're more of a console gamer in terms of context, it's like a much smarter and much more effective technique than Sony's checkerboarding trick that they use to fake 4K on their consoles for the PS4 Pro and the PS5. Quite a lot of games they market as running at 4K don't actually run at 4K. NVIDIA's DLSS is really very impressive and can look damn close to true native 4K rendering, especially if you're just, actively playing the game and not freeze-framing or pouring through recordings and pixel peeping or know just exactly what kind of artifacts to actually look for in the first place. Most people just will not be able to tell the difference. It's that good. And if we assume Nintendo are going to keep with the handheld console hybrid design choice, DLSS can potentially save a lot of battery power without the same visual compromise they currently have to use when switching between desktop and handheld modes, for example. And in pure desktop mode, full power mode, it could indeed let games keep running at 1080 internally, but scale out to a very clean looking 4K without the kind of overhead a native 4K image rendering would need, of course. In any case, at this point we're stretching from facts and realities into conjecture, so let's close out. Do I expect a new Nintendo Switch hardware revision in mid to late 2023? Yes, absolutely, 100% I do. I fully expect it to happen. Will it be a true successor to Nintendo Switch, or will it be some sort of new brand thing, a new starting point? I feel like Nintendo might stick with the Switch branding. The Switch branding has been very popular. Nintendo might be a little bit gun-shy in the marketing issues they had around the Wii versus Wii U releases, two completely different machines that a lot of people were very confused about. But we also do live in an era where things like the Xbox Series S and Series X exist, which do run the same games but at very different performance levels. Is the general marketing public, is the average gamer aware enough of these kind of differences for Nintendo to get away with calling it the Switch 2 or Switch Pro or Switch 4K or whatever? But that's a marketing decision. Fact is, I fully expect new hardware to come out in 2023. Both the facts of the hardware NVIDIA are currently producing, including a recent reveal of Linux kernel support being added for the unreleased Tegra chipset we've been talking about, and of course the Switch runs on an Android base, which itself is Linux-based, and the facts of Nintendo's own decades of history of console releases being a pretty reliable 6 years apart, and the Nintendo Switch about to hit that 6-year mark, and the facts of even Nintendo's own flagship system-selling titles in the likes of Pokemon seeing heavy criticism around performance and presentation factors. And while the Switch's gimped graphics and performance is no new talking point by any measure, we're seeing it become ever more of an issue than ever before, and ever more aggressively discussed than ever before, and fewer gamers than ever feeling like it's an acceptable compromise they're willing to make given the other benefits of the Switch's design choices. Because of course any reasonable gamer knows you're making a compromise for the Switch. It's underpowered because this is designed to be portable, it's a hybrid thing. No one's expecting a game on the Switch to look like a PS5 game. That would be unreasonable and stupid. But I do believe we've crossed the point where people feel like the compromise is worth it anymore. They want more. They want better. And not just want, but are starting to loudly demand it. It all very much feels like Nintendo, NVIDIA, and the gamers are all very much ready to pull the trigger on the new thing. So yeah, those are the facts as they stand, as we know them, and a little bit of conjecture there at the end, I suppose, and hopes and dreams and whatnot, because what is life without hopes and dreams? I guess all we can do now is, well, see what happens next, see what new rumors start rumbling in the new year, in late January, after the Christmas and post-Christmas sales periods have ended, and Nintendo have sold as many existing Nintendo Switch bits of hardware as they could possibly manage over this rich, sellable season. Hopefully you found this interesting. Thank you as always to the patrons up above there, and I hope I hear from each and every one of you about what your hopes and dreams and expectations or cynicism for our new Nintendo console might be in the down below. Thanks for watching. I am Bloody. I'll catch you next time.